Welcome back to the deep dive. Looks like you guys are really interested in carbon capture, huh? You've sent us a ton of articles and research on it.
It seems like everyone wants to know if it's the climate savior, some say it is, or a bunch of hype.
Right, like will it really help us fight climate change? I mean, some of these sources even mention the world's first offshore carbon capture project, the Sleipner project, which started way back in 1996 off the coast of Norway.
Yeah, it's been around for a while, but can it really do what we need it to? That's the big question.
Yeah, can it scale up enough to make a real difference? And what about all the, ethical questions around it? Is it really a good thing? But okay, before we go too deep, maybe we should start with the basics, right? Just so everyone's on the same page. What exactly is carbon capture, utilization, and storage? Or CCUS for short.
Okay, so imagine like a giant vacuum cleaner for carbon dioxide. CO2, that's the stuff we need to get rid of.
Ah, so it just sucks it up.
Well, yeah, it captures it, but then we can do things with it, like we can store it underground safely. Or even use it to make stuff. That's where the utilization comes in.
Oh, so it's not just about capturing it, it's what we do with it after.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. But why are we so focused on capturing carbon in the first place?
Well, the amount of CO2 that's already in the atmosphere is a big problem. Scientists are saying we'd only have like 6 years, maybe less, before we hit that 1.5 degrees Celsius warming limit that the Paris Agreement set.
6 years? Whoa, that's not a lot of time. I can see why people are looking for solutions fast.
Yeah, exactly. So CCUS is kind of like a tool to help us cut down those emissions. Of course, we still need to phase out fossil fuels. That's the big one.
Yeah, some sources say focusing on CCUS just distracts us from, actually moving away from fossil fuels. What do you think about that?
I mean, yeah, it's a valid point. CCUS shouldn't be like a replacement for that, getting rid of fossil fuels. I mean, it's more like, maybe you can buy us some time while we're working on that transition.
Ah, okay, I see. So it's not the solution, but it could be part of the solution.
Yeah, I think that's a better way to look at it. And, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they've actually endorsed CCUS as part of the solution, I mean.
Wow, so even the scientists are on board with this.
Yeah. And plus, there's a lot of money being invested in CCUS globally. Governments and companies are putting billions into it. Like last year, the U.S. committed over $8 billion to CCUS projects. So I think it's safe to say people are taking it pretty seriously.
Okay, so people are investing, the scientists are on board. But how does it actually work? I mean, you mentioned the vacuum cleaner thing, but what are the actual methods?
Well, there's a couple of main ways. One is capturing CO2 directly from big sources of emissions, like power plants or industrial processes, like cement production, steel, stuff like that.
Makes sense. Go to the source, right?
Yeah, exactly. Then there's another way. It's called direct air capture that pulls CO2 directly from the air, wherever it is.
Direct air capture. That sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but how do we make sure it doesn't create more emission than it removes? Doesn't take a ton of energy.
Yeah, that's super important. The energy source for direct air capture is a major factor. Ideally, it would be powered by renewable energy, so it's not adding to the problem.
So, okay, we've got different ways to capture the carbon, but then what do we do with it all? That's where the utilization and storage part comes in, right?
Yeah, that's where things get a little tricky. Where a lot of the debate comes in.
Okay, so on the one hand, there's this optimism around CCUS. The Sleipner project that we talked about has been capturing and storing CO2 for almost 30 years. And then you have companies like Climeworks in Iceland. They're doing direct air capture and showing that it's possible.
Yeah, for sure. Those are good examples. They show how CCS could really help us move towards a low-carbon future. Think about industries that are hard to decarbonize, like cement and steel. CCUS could be a game changer for them.
And direct air capture could even help us reverse some of the climate damage by taking CO2 out of the air.
Right, exactly. It could potentially lower the overall concentration of greenhouse gases. But we also need to talk about the criticisms. It's not all sunshine and roses.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if it was a perfect solution, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. So what are the downsides? What are the critics saying?
Well, one big concern is that CCUS is being used to keep us hooked on fossil fuels. Instead of helping us move away from them, it's actually keeping them around.
Wait, how does that work?
So a lot of the captured carbon, it's actually used for something called enhanced oil recovery. Basically, they inject it into old oil wells to get even more oil out, oil that they wouldn't be able to get otherwise.
So instead of reducing our reliance on oil, it's making us use even more.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's why a lot of critics see it as greenwashing. Fossil fuel companies making themselves look good while they keep doing what they've always done.
That's a pretty serious accusation. Are there numbers to back that up?
Oh, yeah. Almost 3/4 of the carbon being captured right now, it's going towards enhanced oil recovery. So it really raises questions about, is this really helping the climate? Or is it just business as usual with a green coat of paint?
So is CCUS a real solution or just a way for the fossil fuel industry to keep going? It's like there are good arguments on both sides.
It's definitely not simple. And even if we, like, ignore the whole enhanced oil recovery thing, there are still challenges, big challenges we need to talk about.
Okay, like what?
Well, one is the scale of the problem. Even with all the projects we have right now, we're only capturing a tiny, tiny fraction of global emissions, like less than 0.14%.
0.14%, that doesn't sound like much at all.
It's not. So even if we, like, scaled it up massively, it wouldn't be enough to solve everything. And that's assuming it works perfectly, which, well, it doesn't always.
What do you mean?
Well, a lot of CCUS projects, they don't actually capture as much carbon as they say they will.
Oh, so they underperform.
Yeah, exactly. There were a couple of examples in the research you sent. Like there's ExxonMobil's Chute Creek facility. It's one of the biggest CCUS operations, and it's been way off its targets.
And what about that Archer Daniels Midland plant, the one in Decatur, Illinois?
Yeah, right, that one too. They're capturing way less CO2 than they planned. And it's not just those two, it happens a lot. So yeah, it makes you wonder how reliable this whole thing really is.
So we've got the scale issue and the fact that the projects don't always work as well as they should.
What else? Oh, there's another big one. It's the storage. Storing the captured CO2 underground, it's not as simple as it sounds. We don't really know how much space we have.
Ah, you mean those like pockets in the rock formations? The pore space.
Yeah, and we try to estimate how much CO2 they can hold, but it's not an exact science. There have been projects where they had to stop because they realized there wasn't as much storage space as they thought.
Do you have an example?
Yeah, the Insula project in Algeria, they were injecting CO2 into, it's called a saline aquifer. Basically, it's rock that's saturated with salt water, but they had to shut it down because they were worried the CO2 would leak out.
So even if we can capture it, we might not have anywhere to put it.
Yeah, that's a real possibility. It just adds another layer of complexity to the whole thing. We've got the scale issue, the underperforming projects, the storage uncertainty, and we haven't even talked about money yet.
Right. Money always makes things more complicated. Maybe this is a good place to take a break. Let everyone catch their breath.
Yeah, good idea. We've covered a lot.
We'll be back in a bit to talk about the cost of carbon capture. That's where things get really interesting. Stick with us. All right, we're back. And now it's time to talk about the elephant in the room, right? The cost of all this. Carbon capture can't be cheap.
Nope, not at all. It's definitely a major factor, especially with that direct air capture. Remember how we talked about pulling CO2 from like really thin air? It takes a lot of energy to do that and special equipment.
Okay, so how much are we talking about here? Give me some numbers.
All right, so the research you sent had a pretty wide range, actually. For capturing from, sources like power plants, it's something like $15 to $120 per ton of COC.
Okay, that's a lot already.
But for direct air capture, get this, it's between $225 and $500 per ton. And some estimates go even higher, like up to $1,000.
Whoa. Okay, that was a big difference. And when you think about how much CO2 we need to capture, like billions of tons, those costs, they add up fast.
Yeah, they do. And that's a big reason why some experts are like, hold on, maybe we should only use CCUS as a last resort. When we've tried everything else, they say that money could be better spent on, like, renewable energy, which is getting cheaper all the time.
So it's about deciding where to put our resources, right? What gives us the best bang for our buck, both for the environment and, our wallets.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. But then there's the other side that says, hey, we're in a climate emergency. We need to try everything, even if it's expensive, just in case it can help us avoid the worst case scenario.
That makes sense, too. Like, if we wait for the prices to drop, it might be too late. And as we said, we don't have a lot of time.
Right. And who knows, maybe the costs will come down as the technology gets better, right? We saw that with solar and wind power. They used to be super expensive, and now look at them.
So there's hope that CCUS could be like that, too. More affordable in the future.
It's possible, yeah. But, even if it does become cheaper, we still have to remember it's not a magic solution. It's only one part of the whole climate change picture.
I see, yeah. So besides the technology getting better, are things we could do like policy changes or economic incentives to make CCUS more, I don't know, doable?
For sure, governments have a big role to play there. They could, put a price on carbon, so companies have to pay for their emissions. That would make them want to invest in CCUS. And then there's stuff like tax credits or subsidies. That could help too.
And what about private investors? They're already putting money into CCUS, but could that be even bigger?
Absolutely. I think more and more investors are realizing that climate change is a big risk, financially, I mean. So investing in climate solutions, like CCUS, starts to look like a pretty smart move. We're seeing venture capitalists, big companies, they're all putting money into CCUS startups. And that trend's only going to grow.
So it could be like a win-win. The government encourages investment that leads to new innovations. The price comes down. Everybody's happy.
That's the idea. But we got to be careful, right? Make sure those investments are going to the right projects, the ones that are actually good for the climate, not just, more enhanced oil recovery.
That's a good point. We need to make sure it's actually making a difference, not just making some companies richer.
Exactly. Accountability is key, and that comes from, well, everyone. Governments, investors, and, people like our listener who are taking the time to learn about all this.
Yeah, well said. Okay, so we've talked about the science, the economics, the whole shebang. I bet our listener is feeling a lot more informed about this whole CCUS thing now.
It's a complicated topic, but yeah, hopefully they're seeing all the different angles now.
All right, it's time for the final part of our deep dive. We'll be back in a sec to try and put it all together, talk about what it all means, and maybe leave you with some things to think about. All right, we're back, and I don't know about you, but my head is spinning a little bit. Carbon capture, it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it's definitely complicated. A lot of moving parts.
So after all that, what are your main takeaways? What really sticks out to you?
I think it just shows how tough this whole climate change thing is. There's no easy fix. Yeah, CCUS could help, but it's not, a magic wand. And there are definitely downsides.
Yeah, it's easy to get excited about new technology, but we have to be, realistic.
Right, exactly. And we can't forget about the big picture. We still need to transition away from fossil fuels. That's the main event. CCUS is more I don't know.
Like a side dish.
Yeah, maybe, or a backup plan. It's not the solution, but it could help us buy some time while we figure out the main course.
Okay, I like that. So it's a part of the plan, but not the whole plan. What about you, listener? What do you think after all this? Are you feeling more hopeful about CCUS or more skeptical?
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
I mean, on the one hand, it could help reduce emissions from those hard-to-change industries and maybe even pull some CO2 out of the air. But then there's the whole, using it for enhanced oil recovery and the cost and the storage issues.
And the ethical questions, too, who's responsible for making sure that underground storage is actually safe? And what happens if something goes wrong? Those are big questions.
Yeah, a lot to think about for sure. So to wrap things up, I wanted to share one last thought. I came across this question in the research you sent, and it really made me think.
Okay, lay it on me.
What if, and just hear me out on this, what if we could guarantee that all the captured carbon was stored safely? Forever, and no one could use it for, getting more oil or anything like that. Would you feel differently about CCS then?
Wow, that's a good one. It really makes you think about, what's important. I guess for me, if we knew for sure it wasn't propping up the fossil fuel industry and it was truly safe, yeah, I'd be much more supportive.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way. It's about trust, right? Do we trust that this technology will be used the right way and that it won't backfire on us later?
Big questions, for sure. And I think everyone has to answer them for themselves, but at least we're talking about it, right? That's the first step. We have to be aware of all these complexities, and then we can start to figure out the best path forward.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for our carbon capture deep dive. Thanks for joining us. I hope you learned something new and maybe even have some new questions to ponder.
It's a constantly changing field, so stay curious and keep learning.
That's what we're all about here on the deep dive. Thanks for listening.